So here's something that you never thought was possible. Solaris running on a PowerPC system. That's right. There was an obscure port of Solaris to the PowerPC. And nobody thought that that was even possible. That's interesting, isn't it? Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be showing you one of the more interesting non-x86 systems I own. This is the IBM RISC System 6000, as the label says, or RS6000 for short, 40p, or model 7020. So this system, I'm going to plug it in real quick. Actually, it's already plugged in. So this system is a PowerPC 601. Yes, the same 601 you found in Macs. It's a PowerPC 601 based desktop, and it can run some interesting software. So let's turn this on, and you can hear the same beep and a nice hard drive spin up. But that's the same beep you're used to hearing from like Macs and all. So let's let the system start up normally because there's already some weirdness here at play. But the IBM 7020, or 6015 as it's interchangeably called by software, is a PrEP-based PowerPC system. Because PrEP was PowerPC reference platform. Nowadays that term has different connotations, because if you mention PrEP, people are going to laugh at you. Because I've heard stories on Telegram of people who've went up to their doctors and they've said, "Hey, can I get some PrEP drugs?" And their doctors start like trying not to laugh at them because it's like, "Oh, we know why you're asking for these PrEP drugs." But before PrEP drugs were a thing, thanks society, PowerPC reference platform also meant PrEP, and as you can see, there's no front display on that computer because PrEP means, well, for some reason the first two PrEP computers, this and the original 43P, featured basically this weird PrEP version where there was no display on the front panel, and it was sort of designed to be as cheap as possible so that they could, the idea was that more companies were going to build these, kind of like with Mac clones, and PowerPC would take over. And for a while, PowerPC did have a bit of a market share in the consumer market, but it wasn't from IBM, it was from Apple, and they didn't follow the PrEP standard. They made their own standard. So, with PowerPC, there's all these weird standards. There's PrEP, there's CHRP, there's PowerNV, and the Open Power standard, which has its own bootloader, Petit Boot. But then all the other systems had their own funky versions of open firmware. Apple had open firmware in their New World Macs, which were the closest to Chirp and PrEP that Apple made. But then there were the Old World Macs, and aside from the very first new bus-based, like Old World Macs, many of them had open firmware as well. So it's this whole confusing mess of which Macs, which PowerPCs have which bootloader, which OSs can they run. And there's only two real RS6000 desktops that can run these weird, both of these weird OSs that I'm showing. And the first one is a bit of an interesting thing. So, the thing is, this firmware does not have open firmware, but this bootloader is an open firmware implementation. You can type in print, and that's because this thing is basically the Solaris for PowerPC bootloader. It's print. I actually had to modify boot device because if you type in boot disk, which is what it does by default, it will not boot because the SCSI ID is wrong. But here's where it gets interesting. You see little endian true? That's because these computers basically... I'm going to type in boot now. That's because these computers could run in two Endian modes, and Solaris and Windows NT ran in little Endian mode. But AIX ran in big Endian mode. Yeah, so as you can see, Solaris is booting on a PowerPC. I'm guessing you never thought that was possible. But there's actually some interesting bootloaders that load from floppy disks and then the hard disk when the OS is installed for these RS6000, for these two RS6000 models. And that's because, you know, with IBM, they wanted to make PowerPC the main platform. So there was a Solaris port that was only a limited release, but and the compiler was even harder to find than the OS, but somebody just put the raw files for it, not installer, just the raw files for the compiler online. And there is very, very, very little software for PowerPC Solaris. But as you can see, the system is coming up. The system is ready, and it's starting CDE, which you have to install off a second disk. You can't just use the first disk, you have to install CDE off a second disk with the desktops. But then once you do that, you get both an old version of Sun CDE and Open Windows. And let me show you what happens when you select each one. You select Open Windows and CDE, and you get a very aesthetic, like, look how aesthetic this is. This is aesthetic. It makes you want to go back to the 90s when technology was optimistic and not, oh, install Windows 10 or else you'll get hacked, and by the way, shut up about it sending us data. What do you mean you're paranoid about Windows 10? Let's log into Open Windows. And you never thought you'd see on a PowerPC system Solaris. And here it is. Solaris running natively on a PowerPC system. And the compiler was like lost for the longest time. So this thing was literally just a toy for years and years. So if you've ever used Solaris, you know the drill. You know exactly what you're getting into. These are all the programs you're probably going to get because nobody's ever compiled anything for this platform, ever. And if you look in demos, you get something about that weird Macintosh application environment. I don't even know if this thing was even available on PowerPC, but they've got an ad for the weird Macintosh emulator on here. So I'm gonna quit, and let's quit out of this. Quit File Manager. Let's go to Workstation Info. So you can see IBM PPS Model 6015 PPC Prep Sun OS. And let's go to Utilities Console. And let's make the console window a little bit bigger so that we can like see everything. Let's type in uname A. Let's fire up another console window so I can show you. Utilities, console, and here's, as you can see, look, PowerPC 601. But let's show you one more weird thing, okay? I think it's in the user folder, so ls. And here's a full list of the supported models that this OS can run on. So the 7248, the 6015, this IBM 6040, 6042, 6050, 6070, and the Motorola Power Stacks, which are even harder to find than some of these IBMs are. And of course, we've got our games. And I don't even know if there's supposed to be any that you could install or what, but there's nothing. Yep. Because there's nothing for this OS at all either. Alright, we're done with Solaris. There's nothing on Solaris for PowerPC. Let's try a different interesting OS. So let's put a different boot floppy into this machine and let's reboot. So init 5. I could have done init 6, but it reboots itself even if you tell it to shut down. It does not halt. It just beeps. So I could probably put in the system management diskette, but instead of putting in the system management diskette, I think I will put in a different floppy disk. And that will be the ARC disk. So let's take the SMS disk out. Let's put the ARC disk in. So this is a different bootloader than Solaris's open firmware shim. So it's doing the RAM test, but we've got our ARC floppy in. And this is the first boot device, just like on a normal PC. So what's going to happen is when this is done and it clears the boot process, because there's no boot display so you can't see the status. Once it clears the boot process, we're going to get a screen where we can install another interesting OS, that being the PowerPC versions of Windows NT. So ARC on these computers does not load from the ROM like it does on DEC Alphas, where it's a toggleable BIOS, or on MIP systems where it's the only like firmware, because with those MIP systems they were designed only for Windows NT. But this could run both AIX, Solaris, and get this, it can even run Windows. So the ARC floppy's in the drive. It's currently reading from it. It made the beep which says it's done booting. So it takes a while to read the ARC floppy from the floppy drive, of course. Then you see the blue screen, and it's just like you switched firmwares on a DEC Alpha. It launches the bootloader, and you pick a language. And then you go to Installation and Setup Services, and you go to either Simple or Advanced. And we're going to hit Simple because we want to make a bootloader, or well, partition it. So what it does is it installs the ARC bootloader from the floppy. We're going to hit Full Install, yes. Are you absolutely sure? So you keep the ARC floppy in the drive. And now what it's doing is it's replacing the Spark, or not Spark, a Sun open firmware shim with Arc. So Arc is going to be the bootloader on this system now that it reads from the hard disk. And if you unplug the hard disk, it will not see anything with Arc. Basically, it's back to being an RS-6000. So it takes a while to write because it's a floppy disk and it's writing everything on the floppy to the hard disk. So our partition's created, and then we pick 2 drives, and it makes the OS loader partition. And now we're going to set up Windows NT from the CD, so we just got to pop the CD in. And I'm going to go and get my NT CD and do that. So now what we're going to do next is, we could do several options. We could go back to the main menu, but I'll probably poke around the main menu later. So let's hit Setup Windows NT from CD. And that's probably going to be the OS I'll keep on here because there's just more software for this than there is Solaris for PowerPC. And it's more worth keeping this around for that than it is AIX, because I've got multiple boxes that can run AIX way faster. So once you've popped the NT CD in, it will search for the PowerPC directory and it will load the files. And just like if you've ever installed Windows NT on a normal Windows PC, it's literally the same exact thing. You put the disk in, you load Windows NT setup, you wait for the slow CD drive to read everything. And I think this is like a quad speed or dual speed. This is not a fast CD drive either, so it takes a while. But it's literally just like installing Windows NT on a normal, everyday Walmart computer. If you ever install NT on a Packard Bell or Compaq, you know the deal. It's the same exact thing. Then you get your computer deciding to take a big dump on you and throwing up errors like this for some reason. I think it's saying inaccessible boot device. That's strange. I can't even read this blue screen because it's in literal gibberish. So we just have to do what we have to do. Flip the system off. And as you can see, this thing's weird when it comes to power circuitry. It doesn't actually shut the system off all the way. But since Arc is on here, I think I'll be able to actually get it going. So I'll come back in a few minutes and see if this has fixed itself. Round 2, same old blue screen. So to speed up the process of getting this thing to actually boot and weeding out the CD drive, I'm going to plug my external Plex Store CD drive in. Because this CD drive is a bit old and slow anyway, so let's do that. So here's how you make Windows NT setup go much quicker. You replace the slow 2-speed drive with a wicked fast 12-speed drive, and watch Windows NT actually get to the setup instead of blue screening with garbage. So what we're going to do is we're going to press enter to do the good old setup. If you've ever done NT4, you know the drill. Much faster than the Multia's video, by the way. IBM Power Series 6015 Y-Tech video chip. Yeah, I think everybody forgot who Y-Tech was, or that they made video chips. So we're going to install it here in our unpartitioned space. NTFS. and it's making the partition. And then from here on, it's just your typical Windows NT setup. If you've ever used Windows NT, you know the drill. You know that it installs the same way. You get the same setup. You blast through it the same exact way. Yada yada, you know the drill. So I'm going to come back when this is all said and done. Here's a little unwritten rule when working with old UNIX boxes, Macs, and whatnot from the era. Get yourself an external SCSI drive because you never know when it will save you. Along with the fact that it makes OS installation possible on computers like SPARC stations that don't even have CD drives. And it's copying the files just fine. Much quicker than the original drive could as well. So once NT4 setup is going through and the OS is almost finally installed, the bootloader changes and now you get a Windows NT option. It's clear that the Windows bootloader was influenced in a way by ARC, both with how it labels stuff and with how ARC displays boot options. So Windows NT is just doing the good old setup. I mean, if you've ever installed NT, I literally was not kidding when I said the process is exactly the same as it is on a normal computer. You get the FAT to NTFS conversion, you get the check which options you want part after this, and it installs the drivers for everything. And then boom, you've got NT. So here's where it gets fascinating about Windows NT for PowerPC. Windows NT for PowerPC supports a lot of the same hardware that Windows NT on x86 supports. So we've got support for hardware that never even shipped inside an RS6000, including NE2000, Intel Ether Express, LAN adapters, IBM Token Ring, some Digi adapters, who knows what they are. Look, you can even put the famous DEC 21040 or 21140 Ethernet adapters in this system. Look, even the DEC Multi has Ethernet controller. Oh my god. And that's not even available on a PowerPC system because that's on a motherboard. But as you can see here, we've got quite a few options for what Ethernet adapters will work in here. You could plug an AMD PC net in here, 3COM 3C595, the DEC 21140, but we're going to hit Start Search. So this thing right now won't run AIX, and that's because the Ethernet adapter here is something that Solaris and NT work with, but not AIX, because AIX is very picky about hardware. In fact, I saw a post from some QEMU devs trying to kind of emulate this machine, and they said that the emulated version of this in QEMU is not even close to the real thing because it's something that'll boot AIX and not whatever was actually in the 40p, apparently. That's just what I read, but that's kind of interesting how some emulator authors will take shortcuts. But anyhow, 3COM Etherlink 3. I think we're going to check these because why not? But we've got our other protocols here too, including AppleTalk. But yeah, Windows NT for PowerPC supports pretty much the same hardware that Windows NT for x86 supports out of the box, but that's really all you get is that hardware. You don't get anything fancier or anything. But that's just a little interesting quirk of Windows NT for PowerPC. So if you wanted to put a random NIC in, it will work. But not with AIX. Maybe not with Solaris, but this NIC does work in Solaris. Well, this is a new error message I've never seen before. It's all because I right-clicked here and held it over too long. Anyways, PowerPC. Nice. Alright, so PowerPC Windows is installed. Let's go to Control Panel. And let's push the adjust button. One of these, I think, does that. There we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Multimedia. And we're going to go add the sound card. And as we can see, IBM PowerPC audio is a thing here. So let's install that. And as you can see, IBM copyright. Let's install this. Let's hit don't restart now, because let's poke around a little bit on the CD. Maybe hit autoplay. Browse CD, add remove software. So yeah, there's actually a native version of that executable, it seems. Let's go to DriveLib. And we've got some stuff for like PNP-ISA, print. And they're all in folders for the architectures. Joystick driver for PowerPC. Sound Blaster PNP for PowerPC. ESS only for x86. But a lot of these drivers have PowerPC versions. And some language packs. So yeah, the NT4 CD does have a bit of interesting stuff for PowerPC. Let's reboot. And now it's doing the reboot process, so the mouse is frozen up. And it takes a little while to clear the frame buffer. But then it does the RAM tests, then it just boots into the OS. Well, boots into ARC, then the OS. Alright. Guess what? Now that you install the driver, sound works. Just waiting for it to load. Yeah, that's right, NT4's loaded. And I'm gonna uncheck this. It already has more games than Solaris for PowerPC does, because it has Pinball and Solitaire. 3D Pinball for PowerPC, baby. This is what gaming's all about. It's about playing 3D Pinball on PowerPC. No music, because there's no MIDI chip in the system. But let's go full screen because we have to. And you can only play this so well with one hand. But here is 3D Pinball running on an IBM with a PowerPC. So yeah. And then of course there's Solitaire. But there's not a lot of native software for this system. In fact, a lot of it is 16-bit. And it's 16-bit Windows/DOS programs running in an x86 emulator. And this can only emulate 16-bit programs. But, hey look, we got Solitaire here. And it's Solitaire. You can never go wrong with Solitaire. Sure, people like to say, oh, this is what my grandma plays. We get it, you're not enough of a gamer where you can actually win a Solitaire match. And we got a CD player here. Let's see if it actually plays a CD. And look at this nice thick CD drive. See how thick this is? Well, let's pop a CD in. Yeah, let's pop this CD right in. See what Windows does. Well, it's playing it. Guess I better stop for copyright. Alright, so it's the next day. I got overnight Windows NT 4.0, Service Pack 2, and Visual C version 4.2 or 4.1 or whatever the last version for PowerPC was installed. And I did all that, and I did a few takes, but I wasn't satisfied with them. So, since it's earlier in the day now, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a video showing, or finishing up this video showing you the boot menu of this thing, because it's quite interesting. So, just like PS2 systems from back in the day, IBM PS2 mind you, you need to make a special floppy disk with the software on it that it needs to load. Case in point, I'm going to turn the system on now. So, you don't have the keys listed on here, but F4 is the key to get into the boot menu according to the menu. So, maybe manual. So, F4, according to the service manual, this key should get you into the menu to change stuff on this thing, but you also need to make the floppy. Now on these machines it's called the SMS floppy, and for older versions of the SMS it was actually one floppy contained both the firmware update and the management software. But now for like the last version, which was I think it was version 1.29, the one this has, they made it so it only has one floppy now. And what it has on here is a 512 kilobyte ROM, I think, because that's how big the one is. That's how big the flash update file is. And then there's also a then there's the stuff on this disk. So it's telling me to insert the management diskette. And if you have the disk installed, it will go right to the menu. So if you have the disk inserted here, it'll go to the menu, but I'm going to put the disk in now. Press enter. And it's reading the disk. It's basically reading the menu into memory. So we've got our management services. And if you've ever used an IBM PowerPC system, other than the fact that this has diagnostic files on the floppy, and if you hit that it will actually load it into memory. Other than that, if you've ever used an RS-6000, it's basically a nicer version that looks more like a DOS program instead of the plain white open firmware prompt. PowerPC 601, RAM is maxed. As you can see, both our external CD-ROM and our hard disk show up. And everything in the system shows up except for ISA devices. You can pick your boot device. If anything, this is more like a BIOS than SMS on the later machines. So here you can change stuff like displaying the error log. There were actually errors logged for battery issues because the onboard battery was corroded and I had to replace it. Yeah, that's right, this had a leaky coin cell. You never see those. So we're going to hit escape. And I'm going to show you another cheat code. So basically we're back at the insert disk screen. So we're going to type in eat a bug. All one word. And then you get dropped down to resident monitor, which is kind of like, I think a good way to describe it is, it's kind of like the UFI or EFI shell, in the sense that you have a lot of DOS-like commands, and you can also reboot the system, do a little bit of debugging. It's kind of like that. So we're going to reboot. And I'm going to show you another firmware secret of this machine. So, it's rebooting. It takes like 3 or 4 seconds, well, a little longer than that, for it to clear the screen and display the PowerPC splash screen. So we're going to press 1, 2, 3 instead of F4. And this is another secret of the PowerPC boot ROM. What's going to happen is we're going to be getting a different firmware that's more in line with these icons. Well, actually a different menu instead of the text-based menu. And I wonder if this was like unused or basically a prototype of what was to be used in the 140 and newer machines. And I think it might as well be a prototype of that menu, but it's a bit of an interesting quirk. So it's doing the post. It's checking SCSI devices now. And looky here, you get a different graphical screen. It's reading from the floppy. And it takes a little longer to read from the floppy this time. See, looky here, System Management Services. And it's harder to use than the other one in my opinion, but... and it doesn't even show all the information. But it's clear that this was the direction they wanted to go, as a graphical boot menu. See if we cancel. Like, see, look, you've got like a nice number written up there. And if we change it, it changes the graphical number. If we cancel, you get this nice aesthetic. I'm going to show you this again. Nice, it tears it up. Like, the metaphor here is paper. And it tears up the paper. Like, you don't want to do this, so it tears it up. VPD, same thing here. And it's pretty clear that you can't change as much here as you can on the other one. But it looks nice and pretty aesthetic. Then we're going to hit exit. And when we hit exit, it drops us right back to the PowerPC portable bootloader. So this second SMS menu is clearly missing some features, but I found it through sheer luck that this system actually has 2 different boot menus, which is fairly interesting to think about. Like, they actually have a second boot menu that's undocumented. Well, maybe a system menu, that's undocumented. Fairly interesting stuff. I've had so much fun discovering all the secrets in this machine. So let's see if I can reset the system. So I can't reset the system when I'm in the ARC loader, so I'm going to have to turn the system off and on again. But Yeah, this is interesting. So let's poke around in ARC a little bit and see what secrets ARC has. So let's go to... So basically, run a maintenance program is the same as it is on Alpha. Installation setup services is very streamlined, and you don't need to run an ARC setup utility like on Alpha. You can go to Simple Setup to basically blast the drive or start NT setup. Advanced Setup lets you view partition info, view MBR. You can manage partitions. You get the SMS, which is, it's called SMS probably to keep with IBM terminology. And then you can show configuration info, like what's in the system, kind of like on Alpha. NVRAM, details of the PCI devices. So we get our NCR810 SCSI controller, fairly common. Display controller. So yeah, you can see what is in here. Show environment variables, and as you can see, Solaris PowerPC saves its open firmware variables as environment values. So output device, little endian true, display mode, boot device, Solaris ELF, and then we've got our Windows NT ARC values right below that. We've got our memory map, the disk MBR, we don't want to clear this, set keyboard layout and language, boot menu, and then Windows NT 4.0 PowerPC Service Pack 2. And the OS loader screen is just like you see on an x86 box, except it's blue. And here we go. I'm going to hit the button to optimize the image. Service Pack 2 on a PowerPC. And of course, it's just like using it on an x86 machine, except there's no software. But there is a compiler at least. So I've already shown you the basics. It's got 3D pinball, it's got solitaire, it's got sound. There's a handful of compiled apps. There's an aesthetic boot sound, because nowadays aesthetics are garbage. You got that flat design garbage everywhere, which looks like crap, and then you got this aesthetic right in your face. And I've got Windows NT 4 on here. Here we go. It's taking a little while to load. Microsoft Developer Studio for PowerPC. Fortran Power Station. And all you get on this system is Visual C. Man, these are some sick Windows 95 aesthetics right here. Like, there's so much aesthetic in this splash screen that it's going to blast you back to 1995. Like, not just any 1995, the idealized version of 1995, where everything was perfect, the music was good, and the aesthetics were sick, and there were no problems in the world. Yeah, so Visual C 4.1 it seems. How often did you expect to hear that coming from a PowerPC system? So we've got our manual here for Visual C, and we can make a new project. And yeah, Visual C for PowerPC. So there you have it. And that's your compiler. It's only Visual C 4. You don't get Visual C 6 like on Alpha. You're stuck with Visual C 4 and NT4 Service Pack 2. But hey, it's a PowerPC. So there you have it. There's my video showing off this system. I might take a look at what's inside this machine, but you know, it's kind of basically the same as any other LPX box. It's nothing spectacular, but I might take a look at it in another day or another video or something. So that's all. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for watching. And yeah, look at this aesthetic right here. This was a tour of an interesting IBM machine, and an interesting machine in Windows history as well. So yeah, thanks for watching.